6 decades ago, indifference and injustice combined to begin to write one of the most shameful chapters in the history of American medicine.
In 1932, at the Tuskegee Institute of Macon, Alabama, the U.S. Public Health Services, USPHS, conducted a research experiment on the black community, dubbed the Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study. The study was a gross violation of human rights that included 600 black participants who were under the impression that they were being treated for bad blood. However, rather than being given penicillin, the official treatment for syphilis, many participants were given placebo drugs under the belief that they were being cured. This study and the ensuing behaviors are examples of the medical mistreatment and racism that prevailed in America. After the study was publicly leaked, it quickly became a frontier for reform in the medical world. New laws, regulations, and procedures, such as the National Research Act, were passed, protecting the welfare and human rights of human subjects as well as ensuring the ethics of future studies. Social Darwinism is a theory that heavily influenced the physicians who conducted the Tuskegee study. This theory is based on Charles Darwin's laws of natural selection and subjects human races and groups to the same ideas of evolution and adaptation as in nature. This theory was used to justify racist, colonialist, and imperialist policies based on natural inequalities among individuals. Physicians sought to explore if syphilis would act differently in the bodies of black people under the idea that black and white people had different susceptibility to syphilis. These ideals of division and superiority go hand in hand with the Jim Crow laws of the South that enforced segregation and the notion of being separate but equal. There was another syphilis study done before this that inspired the one at Tuskegee, called the Oslo Study of Untreated Syphilis. This occurred in Norway. It involved white subjects who, unlike the men in the Tuskegee study, gave their full consent to participate and were completely aware of what was happening to them. While they weren't given treatments for syphilis, that was because there were no treatments to give. Around the same time that the Tuskegee Syphilis Study began, the Tuskegee Airmen, a military group of black aviators, were reaching new heights in the military world.
The Tuskegee Airmen and all of the greatness that they did, and then to find out that in this same space, such an atrocious study was being heaped upon our men.
It is truly depressing how when we take one step forward, we oftentimes take 2 steps back. At the time of the Tuskegee study, America was also experiencing the Great Depression, during which many black Americans did not have a safety net financially, and many relief programs had discriminatory practices. Due to these conditions, many fell to the promise of free health care. This was the case with the victims of the Tuskegee study, who the USPHS misled. Doctors dismissed the socioeconomic disparities between black and white people, unbelieving that better health care could alter the course of black health. The ideas and assumptions formed by these physicians became the driving factor behind the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, one being an assumption that African Americans were too dumb to seek treatment. This experiment was created specifically for black, Negro, men. For this study, the researchers at the Tuskegee Institute observed around 600 black men, approximately 400 with syphilis and 200 without it. These participants were deprived of knowledge of the experiment, and even when the cure was developed, participants were given a placebo instead.
In the 1950s, penicillin had become widely accepted as an effective remedy for syphilis. Alabama law mandated penicillin treatment for those infected. However, doctors did not permit the Tuskegee participants to have the new medicine.
Without their knowing or understanding, the study became an observation of how the disease affected African American men. Initially, participants believed that they were receiving treatments for bad blood, all provided for free by the government in addition to burial costs. However, this was not the case.
Men in the study received baseline blood workups, physical exams, and at one point, a spinal tap to determine neurological damage. They were told that the spinal tap was a necessary treatment. In truth, it was not only unnecessary, but also painful and dangerous.
The Tuskegee study was shut down in 1972, and all active participants were given penicillin for treatment. A report by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare stated that the experiment was scientifically unsound and its results were disproportionately meager, composed with known risks to the human subjects involved, acknowledging the harm of the study and that there was nothing to gain from its findings. Survivors, heirs, and representatives of those who died in the study filed a lawsuit in 1973 against the state of Alabama, federal agencies, and physicians working for the USPHS. A settlement of $10 million was reached, with each survivor receiving $37,500, heirs and representatives of deceased participants receiving $15,000, control group members were given $16,000, and their heirs or representatives were given $5,000. In 1997, President Bill Clinton apologized publicly for the government's hand in the Tuskegee experiment. He addressed the mistrust and racial tension that resulted from the study, and in his apology, he spoke to the group of survivors and their families, saying,
"We can look at you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry."
Historically, several marginalized racial and ethnic groups have suffered under the U.S. medical system. The syphilis study at Tuskegee was one of many examples of the medical mistreatment of Black Americans. Due to numerous negative experiences and the history of systemic racism in the medical industry, many Black people today strongly distrust the medical system. These sentiments were evident during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, where many were reluctant to get the vaccine or additional boosters because they didn't trust what was in the shots. Outside of the pandemic, many Black patients prefer to be seen by Black physicians, believing that someone who shares their background would take better care of them, which has often proved to be the case. Confronted with a history of racism and discrimination, the medical world began thinking of ways to improve equity. After the study's shutdown in 1972, new acts that would provide ethical guidance for research were signed and passed into law. The National Research Act went into law in 1974, and it required all research involving humans as subjects to establish an institutional review board that would protect the rights of participants involved in the experiments. Additionally, the U.S. government created the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. This commission identified basic principles of research conduct and ensured that they were followed, such as requiring researchers to get voluntary informed consent from all participants in the study, conducted or funded by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Stemming from their work came 3 principles to guide human research, summarized in a publication report titled The Belmont Report. The 3 principles established by the report are 1. Respect for person, 2. Beneficence, and 3. Justice. Respect for persons set a baseline that all people should be treated as individuals capable of making their own decisions. Beneficence established that there should be no harm against human subjects and that possible benefits should be maximized over possible harms. Lastly, justice mandated that the reward of a study should be greater than the risk. Furthermore, there are 7 guiding fundamentals that make up the conduct of ethical research. 1. Ensuring there are benefits to the study and transparency regardless of the results. 2. Increasing effectiveness and the way studies are run. Invalid and unsound research is unethical due to wasted resources and the potential of risk. 3. Selecting subjects non-maliciously without any factors that could show bias. 4. A risk-to-benefit ratio should be evaluated, ensuring that participants and society receive more benefit than grief. 5. An independent review panel with no stakes in the study should be established to oversee the experiment and ensure ethical integrity. 6. All participants and candidates are entitled to informed consent, where the purpose, risks, benefits, etc. are disclosed transparently to them. It is up to the candidates to make a decision about whether or not they choose to participate. 7. Confidentiality as well is extremely important. The right to change their mind and withdraw, being privy to new information in emergencies, monitoring their welfare, and being informed of the study's discoveries. In October of 1995, President Clinton created a National Bioethics Advisory Commission, funded and led by the Department of Health and Human Services. The commission was tasked with reviewing current regulations, policies, and procedures to protect research volunteers. In 2001, it was succeeded by the President's Council on Bioethics. Then in 2009, it became the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. Efforts to promote and improve high ethical standards in research are still ongoing, proving how the Tuskegee study was a frontier of medical reform.